I'm Myrto Ashe. I'm a family doctor. I trained in Rhode Island back in the late 80s. Then I worked in community health centers for 20 years and was just a conventional family doc. Until recently, about 3 years ago, when my son was diagnosed with attention deficit disorder, and I suddenly felt that the medications weren't going to be what we needed. So I started looking into alternatives, and I learned about this whole enormous world of functional medicine, which looks at underlying causes for things a lot more than conventional medicine does, and I felt that it was a lot more interesting and also could be of a lot more benefit to patients. So I recently opened a practice in Mill Valley where I try to look specifically at situations where people want the situation resolved. So if you have high blood pressure and you want to take medication forever because that's what conventional medicine has in store for you, that's fine, you can. But if you don't want to and you want to look into underlying causes and you're willing to take the time and energy, perhaps the money to do that, we can do that. There's actually a lot in research that is available for all the conditions that are treated chronically by medicine. So the presentation today is about how to stay healthy in winter. And why specifically in winter? It's because you'll see the presentation is in part about vitamin D. Here's just a little overview of the presentation. There's obviously two approaches for staying healthy. One is to avoid germs, and the other one is to strengthen the underlying system that responds to germs. So avoiding germs, we've all heard about. Hand washing is probably the most important thing to do. Important, wash with conventional soap and water, not antibacterial soap. Antibacterial soap doesn't work any better at removing germs from your hands than conventional soap. And in addition to that, it might have its own separate effects on the immune system. It has been linked to allergies, and so it's definitely the wrong idea. It's also very toxic to the environment, but that's yet another issue. But I want to focus the presentation on strengthening the immune system, and I'll talk a little bit more about why later. But we're going to be talking about vitamin D, beneficial bacteria, and nutrients. So vitamin D, that's a picture of the chemical structure of vitamin D. It's fun to look at. It's all about these little molecules. The black ones are carbon, the white ones are hydrogen, and it's amazing to think that these little combinations of molecules have such a huge effect on our bodies. So this is one of the most striking studies that we have. In 2010, in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, a Japanese group published a study of Japanese school children. They gave them 1,200 international units of vitamin D daily for 3 months. Now, the recommended dietary allowance, the actual official recommended dietary allowance is for about 400 international units. It used to be 200. They had this huge, expensive review and came up with, let's push it to 400. So that's pretty amazing because a lot of people don't think it's adequate. So the Japanese decided to take 167 kids and give them 1,200. At that level, you're not going to cause toxicity, especially for just 3 months. 167 received placebo, so they thought they might have been getting something. They didn't know who was getting the vitamin D, who was getting the placebo. They followed them for influenza specifically, not just for colds, because the government always worries more about influenza because it's a lot more dangerous. It can kill children and adults, and it can land you in the hospital, which is expensive. So 31 of the kids on placebo got influenza, and 18 of the kids on the vitamin D got influenza. That's a 40% decrease, and that was statistically significant. They've had additional benefits, actually. The kids who got sick on vitamin D didn't get as sick as the kids who weren't taking it. And also, asthmatic children ended up with fewer, less severe outbreaks of asthma while on the vitamin D. So what do we know about vitamin D? It started out as this vitamin that was really important for preventing rickets in children. Rickets is a bone disease. The bones don't grow properly. I've never seen it because vitamin D got put in milk a long, long time ago, and most kids drink at least a little milk, and so I have never seen it. I am told, though, and maybe Michelle Perot can confirm this, that evidently at Oakland Hospital now, especially in African American children, they are seeing cases of rickets every year. And that's because, as we'll talk about, the vitamin D level in Americans has been dropping. Supplements prevent bone loss in the elderly. Now again, if you give them the 400 recommended dietary intake, you're going to see no difference. But if you bump that a fair bit, you're going to see a serious difference. So this is an important supplement that elderly people should be taking. So the official recommendations are aimed at preventing rickets, but there's a lot of excitement recently about the other possible roles of vitamin D. So vitamin D is misnamed. It's actually not a vitamin, it's a hormone. A vitamin is a substance that you have to take in from the outside, and it's going to participate in chemical reactions inside your body. A hormone is a substance that your body makes, and it's going to be a messenger, a communication molecule. It's going to go from cell to cell, and it's going to turn on some genes for you. So it's a different function. And vitamin D has it participates in some reactions in the bone, maybe preventing rickets, but more importantly, it actually is a hormone. It communicates from your cell to cell and causes certain genes to be expressed. How do we make it? We need LDL cholesterol in the skin, in the presence of sunlight, and that's how we make it. That's how we're designed to make it. There is a little bit of vitamin D in the diet, mostly in eggs and supplemented milk, but that's not how we're supposed to get most of our dose. 15 minutes of full body exposure in the middle of the day will get you 10,000 units of vitamin D, and that's the sort of dose maybe that we're supposed to be getting, and it's scary, but I guess most people don't get that kind of dose. This is what the observations have been, and they've been recent observations. These things were not available when I was in medical school, or probably when most doctors were in medical school. So when I first started reading these things, it was hard to believe that it was true, and it was also hard to believe that then giving vitamin D would fix these things, and that's where the research is now. We know there's correlations. We don't know that giving vitamin D is going to fix these things, and we hope that it will because it would be really helpful, but anyway. So people with higher levels of vitamin D in their blood are less likely to be depressed, to have diabetes, to have had breast cancer, to have had an autoimmune disease, which includes a whole bunch of things, affects probably 1/4 of Americans, rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, Crohn's, thyroid problems, on and on. There's a lot of autoimmune disease out there. Many of them are very, very rare, but if you add them all together, celiac disease is also autoimmune. People with higher levels are less likely to have asthma and allergies. So these, again, they're correlations and not causations, but they are important because American level of vitamin D has been dropping. And it's been dropping fast. This is in 6 years, between 1998 and 2004, when the only research I could find was performed. They tested a very large sample of Americans for their vitamin D levels, and they found that the levels had dropped from 30, which had been barely adequate in 1998, to 24. So the average American is deficient. The percentage of people with normal levels has gone from 45% to 23%. In the subset of African Americans, the chance that an African American in the United States as a whole, so that's not saying whether they're living northern or southern parts of the United States, but as a whole in the United States, and the chance that an African American would have a normal vitamin D level was something like 9%. So almost impossible to find. And some people are in the South where they're actually outside gardening all day, so I don't know. So this is the question, is why is this happening? People are saying maybe more sunscreen, maybe the obesity. Obesity unfortunately interferes with making vitamin D because it's made in your skin. Couch potato syndrome, but I've always been thinking there had to be something else. And so this is what's coming up, again, very recent research. People with higher blood levels of pesticides also are the people who have the lower levels of vitamin D. And so which comes first, right? Maybe when your vitamin D drops, your pesticides rise. But no, they took animal studies and they gave them the pesticides and they watched their vitamin D drop. So most likely the pesticides, as they build up in our bodies, interfere with the production of vitamin D. But it's no surprise, pesticides, we know they interfere with hormones. And vitamin D is a hormone. So now if you don't think of it as a vitamin so much as a steroid hormone, which is what it is, duh, of course, pesticides are one of the problems with vitamin D. Which pesticides? Sort of good and bad news. Organochlorine pesticides, some of which have been banned for decades. here but not elsewhere, but they continue to accumulate in our bodies because they can't break down and because we're at the top of the food chain, so everything we eat has pesticides in it, traces of pesticides in it, and over time we accumulate more and more of it. And some of the organochlorines are still in use. The fact that we use any chemicals that the environment cannot break down has got to be one of the top nonsensical things that humans do. How, as a regulatory agency, could you ever approve something that won't break down, even if it looks safe? So what does vitamin D do? One cool role is it prevents viruses from sticking by increasing a protein called defensin, a substance called this protein. The other thing it does is to help the immune system not overreact. And in my mind, that's the key to staying healthy in winter, is not overreacting to the germs that will come our way, because we have to get out of the house eventually. Our kids will be going somewhere, they'll be playing with somebody and getting something. And the key, I think, is to not overreact. So what happens when you get a cold is not the virus giving you the stuffy nose or the fever or the feeling like you have to stay in bed. The thing that gives you the stuffy nose is your own immune reaction to the virus. And the question is, how much of that reaction is overkill? We have the hygiene hypothesis you might have heard about. And this hypothesis says that the reason why allergies and asthma and so on are going up right now is because our kids are not exposed to enough germs. So they have found that actually people who grow up on farms do have lower rates of autoimmune disease and allergies and asthma. And the idea is that because they get exposed to a lot more germs, their immune system somehow will not overreact so much anymore. And also, because autoimmune disease is an overreaction, your body's attacking itself, so it's definitely an overreaction. It's a big mistake, actually. And so I'm thinking that germs help our immune system, that avoiding them, hand washing is good, but hand washing obsessively might be the wrong thing. Keeping your house clean is good, but being really just dousing it every day. I know people who clean their house every day. They clean the top of the frames every day, dust the top of the frames every day. So no, it's kind of extreme, but there's definitely people in that category, and there's some people who do it because they think that the way to prevent colds is to make sure you don't get the germs. But there's a little bit of a correlation with getting colds and avoiding autoimmune diseases later on. So again, this is research, it's very loose, you're including way too many people in there, but it's just one of those thoughts, like I wonder if by optimizing the immune system, you wouldn't have to worry so much about germs. And then in addition to not being so sick in winter, you could avoid all those other things that vitamin D does for you. So that's what we just talked about, vitamin D and the role of pesticides. On to beneficial bacteria. This is what lactobacillus looks like. Cute. And we'll talk about nutrients as well. So our immune system also depends on our beneficial bacteria. So we've all heard that we have beneficial bacteria in our gut. We have a lot of beneficial bacteria. We have 10 times more bacterial cells in our bodies than there are human cells. And not only that, but each bacterial cell, though it is very small, has 10 times more DNA than each human cell. So 100 times, 100 to 1, the DNA in your body is bacterial DNA. So they're in charge of everything is one way to look at it. They're very active. They make a lot more proteins than we do. They make vitamins. They make all sorts of substances that we use to do different things. They detoxify for us. They can do the opposite. They can decide to keep the toxins in your body. So you need to treat them well. They regulate our immune system, so we need to remember that probiotics are going to be an important part of staying healthy, not just in winter, but also preventing autoimmune disease and a host of problems. So probiotics you can get from food if you like kefir and kimchi and sauerkraut, or you can get from supplements if you can't stand any of that stuff. Of course, getting your nutrients from food is always the best approach, because once you take a nutrient out of its food, you don't know what you missed from there and what sort of bumbling mistake you might be making. And antibiotics are best avoided if possible because the thing that they impact is the beneficial bacteria. Some people, the beneficial bacteria can be impacted for for a year or months. Other people, within weeks, they'll recover, so it depends. You won't know. So other vitamins and minerals that stand out for colds are vitamin B12 and folate, and zinc and copper. B12 and folate, I'm been thinking about a lot because to be absorbed, you need to have a good level of acid in your stomach. And a lot of people take antacids because of reflux, and that will interfere to some degree, and more people more than others, with absorbing vitamins B12 and folate. Stress also decreases in some people, and many people, stress decreases the acid in your stomach. The reason you get reflux is a different thing altogether. But so when you're stressed out, you get more colds. Of course, we know that, but that's one of the ways that it can happen over the long term. And then zinc and copper. Now that comes up for me because many people are deficient, and they're saying our food is deficient, the soils it's grown on is deficient, and why is that? One of the reasons I've been looking into is the pesticide Roundup. So this pesticide, glyphosate is the active pesticide in it, but Roundup contains other toxic substances as well. It's made by Monsanto, and this pesticide is the most used agricultural substance ever. And year by year, we're using more and more and more. All that genetically modified food is Roundup ready, which means that it's resistant to Roundup. And the more we plant, the more Roundup we use, because it goes hand in hand. The whole point of using it is to be able to use Roundup on it. Roundup kills leafy plants, except for the ones that are protected by the genetic modification. However, it's not like you can scrub it off. It incorporates itself into the plant. It's in every leaf and stem. Now corn, the Roundup Ready corn we mostly feed to cattle, and we turn it into high fructose corn syrup, at which point it's probably stripped of the most pesticide and GMO bits because it's so pure sugar. And we make a lot of it into ethanol. So we're not necessarily eating a whole lot of that corn, except maybe corn chips, which are almost, which you can still find, we can find them organic. The thing you can't find organic is cheese puffs. And then, but because we grow so much Roundup Ready stuff, we're basically putting glyphosate all over the world, all over our country. We just spray enormous tons and tons, and year by year it's going up. It doubles year by year. It's gone up, I don't know, 200 times in the last just 20 years. So because we spray these crops with just massive amounts. And then what's in the plant, if you were to eat some soy that is Roundup Ready, then that stuff is definitely full of pesticide. So how it works is kind of interesting. One of the mechanisms is that it is a chelator, and that means that it attaches itself very strongly to certain ions. And these ions are positively charged metal ions, which include zinc and copper that we just talked about, and iron and so on. Manganese is an important one for animal reproduction. And there's a soil scientist out there, Don Huber, who has been talking about the fact that eventually the glyphosate builds up in the soil, where it will rob the bacteria of zinc and copper and iron, etc. And if you think of our beneficial bacteria and how crucial they are to us, the soil beneficial bacteria are just as crucial to the plants trying to grow there. And even though the soy and the corn, etc., are Roundup Ready, they're not any more able than your average corn and soy to grow without the help of beneficial bacteria. So Don Huber has published research showing that those Roundup Ready plants are weak plants, because even though the pesticide didn't kill them, the lack of help from beneficial bacteria makes them grow into different plants that are perhaps less nutritious as well. He's saying that when those are fed to cattle, over years and years, cattle begin to have very high rates of miscarriage and fetal loss. And I haven't been able to find studies on that, but it is a fact that scientists who criticize the GMOs tend to be persecuted, so I don't know if that's the reason why. So the question is, if Don Huber is right, and it's true, you can find research that says that glyphosate is a chelator. What you can't find is research that shows that, in fact, kills or beneficial bacteria. But if it does, that would be enormous. Our immune system would be impaired further. And not only our immune system, our entire system would just not function the same with our beneficial bacteria not being as healthy as they need to be. So how to stay healthy? Well, fewer pesticides would mean eat low on the food chain. Animals do tend to bioaccumulate toxins. Now, well-raised animals should also have a lot of beneficial nutrients. And to some degree, that's going to make up for the fact that you're having more animal fat and therefore more pesticide. We need studies on that, though. I would like the Weston Price Foundation to do studies on that. There's a little bit coming out now that perhaps it is better to incorporate those foods in your diet because they will provide you with some of the nutrients you need to fight off the pesticides. We need more of that. Right now, it's still only a theory to my understanding. I haven't seen the research. So when you do eat well-raised animals, eggs and milk as well, because they're very much a part of the animal, choose the freshest fruits and vegetables. Local food is fresher. And again, though the research is really sparse, I'm going to go with the idea that more tasty, fresher, we know that fresher vegetables have more nutrients. So I'm going to go with the idea that my local farmer's market has the most healthy food for me, even though it might be a little more expensive, definitely a lot less practical to get. And avoid faraway food from countries with different laws, because we have different laws. And they incorporate all sorts of pesticides, even all the work that's been done here, and we consider that it's not even sufficient. Even less is done over there. So here we go. Darn fruit flies, it's not enough having to wash off the insecticide, now I have to peel off the little stickers too. Not happy. A few more tips to lower your, so 2 things to do then to improve your immune system would be, the first one, lower your chemical exposure. Don't use any chemicals you can avoid. I've given up trying to replace them with safer things because I think we just don't know enough about that stuff to make that kind of change. So dryer sheets, household cleaners, and pesticides in the yard and home. You don't need them, don't use them. Further reading, these are some books that I thought were really good. Healthy Child, Healthy World is well done. Robin O'Brien writes The Unhealthy Truth. It's a pretty amazing book, actually. She's a good writer, really gripping. Death by Rubber Ducky, very entertaining book, also very serious. I thought it was actually written by like just 2 guys who exposed themselves to chemicals, and I thought, well, that's a dumb thing to do, and I put it back on the shelf. And then I realized that they weren't just 2 guys, they're like the head of the Canadian Environmental Association or something, I can't remember his name. So they're really serious scientists who have a lot of experience and a lot of connections. And they did that. They chose their substances very, very carefully, but they exposed themselves to substances that they knew were going to be passed out of the body, except for they exposed themselves to a fair amount of mercury. One guy liked tuna, so he went and ate a whole bunch of tuna steaks for 3 days and watched his mercury level go way up. So it's really amazing because they really were able to make that connection. Here's your environment, here's what happens when you change your habits in a certain way, you know, and here's what the connections might be if you were to do that chronically. So a very powerful book and also very entertaining. And Dodging the Toxic Bullet is also a very recent book that does a lot of the same stuff, basically. Looks at chemicals. And then the other side of avoidance, the other side is going to be, again, improve your personal detoxification. And that's all about diet. Cruciferous vegetables, colorful vegetables, magical substances, berries, rosemary, turmeric, garlic, green tea, flax seeds, and onions. Amazing stuff. They basically turn on your detoxification genes. They go to your cells and turn the stuff on in your liver so you can actually detoxify faster. Some people will boost that further with chlorella extracts and herbs, and I think that's not for everybody. I'm developing a lot of healthy respect for that. I think that people will often get side effects from things like chlorella and herbs. Exercise is incredibly important for detoxification. Relaxation, meditation, whatever you can do to bring your stress level down. And working with us. Moms advocating sustainability, because we reach out to government agencies and we try to make a difference. And that is, that's good for your stress level, because then you feel much more powerful in the world. So.